rendered, there's a bunch of, you just link to their JavaScript library and it processes it and makes it look like a mobile app, interact like a mobile app. So anyway, while you would use it, well, if you're here, you'd probably do some web work, and it's all very familiar technologies. It's all HTML5, and really you can get by with that for, if you're just doing like a mobile version of a static website or something, you don't even need to get into the JavaScript and CSS. It's mostly done for you, and there's some other tools that I'll show later. You can develop really, really rapidly because it's that way. Like, I built this quasi slide deck with it in a couple of hours. It's really not that difficult. I'm just showing some of what the code looks like. So it's great for anything that you want to get going really quickly, if you want to prototype something especially. And for almost nothing, you get some really good touch interfaces that have some nice transitions and so on. Another big advantage is, with some very small caveats, you can write it once and then it runs on all the mobile platforms. Of course, there's always things that ding you there, just like any other platform that says that, but it's really pretty minor. And it's actually really fast to test too, because it runs on desktop browsers. You don't have to constantly compile it or constantly open it up, publish it somewhere so you can open it on your phone. You can get 90% of the testing done just on your desktop browser. The other thing that I wanted to mention that I found intriguing about this project is, I think there was a talk a couple of months ago where they loosely mentioned the semantic web, and they basically said it wasn't important. Well, that's true in certain circumstances, but in my role at PhoneGap especially, we do software for educational purposes. And if you do software for education for the government and so on, there's a 501 compliance issue where it has to be accessible to the blind, essentially, and other impaired people. And so for a screen reader to be able to process your app, it needs a certain, semantic web is really, just the same way semantic web helps you for SEO, because with less technology reader, that's the same reason that screen readers can deal with it a lot easier. So the nice thing about jQueryMobile is you start with a very semantic HTML structure, and if you pull the JavaScript and CSS out, you get a very flat, ugly HTML document, but it's great for a screen reader. And they even have implemented this standard, sort of developing standard called WAI ARIA that puts hints into the HTML that tells the screen reader when stuff changes. So like one of the general things no one knows with accessibility is doing pretty much everything we do on the dynamic web where JavaScript changes the structure of the page, because the screen reader can't keep up, can't say that, oh, this portion of the page changed. It needs to know how it loaded initially, and then if it changes later, that can be a problem. Well, this new standard screen readers are starting to deal with, where it can they can watch for particular attributes to say that, okay, this part changed, and they can notify someone over voice. Of course, there's a why not too. So it definitely isn't exactly native. It's really, really close, and it's reasonably fast. But if you get into something really data intensive, you'll notice a slowdown. If you get into something like, if you want to go build a game, do it with something else. You might get away with a 2D game with Canvas or something, but then you're not really taking advantage of what jQueryMobile gives you. There is a pretty large footprint compared to other frameworks, so there are other frameworks like Sencha Touch and so on that just start from scratch and build a mobile interface. jQueryMobile takes advantage of jQuery, which is, what is it now, 50K or something download. So, and most of that 50K is dealing with old, outdated browsers that you're never going to get on a phone. So you're using some of your footprint for something you don't really need. I kind of wish they'd package up the parts they need on. I'm sure that's a really big job to try to figure out what that is. And in my case, it really wasn't a concern because I didn't have a lot of other weight to the pages. You are at the mercy of the browser and the operating system stack. And that did bite me in the ass once, so I'll tell a quick story. So I published my app right about the same time Apple came out with iOS 5.1. And so I had tested it throughout the whole time on got it deployed, got it approved, it was out on the App Store. And maybe a week later I had installed the update, and I noticed that all of a sudden my data would just disappear sometimes. I had to do some searching online, and what I found out was that basically Apple broke local storage, which is just ridiculous in 5.1. Like, local storage is a spec that should behave a certain way, and somehow they decided, either intentionally or unintentionally, I never really found out, that every time your app completely shuts down, local storage got wiped. They like moved the location of it or something. So you wouldn't even notice it if you just closed the app and opened it up a few minutes later, because it would still be in the background. Data would still be there, but if you went and manually killed it, or you turned the phone off, or you had to come back for a week and your phone decided it didn't need it anymore, the data would be gone. Luckily, at the time, they had already been on top of it, people at PhoneGap, and they had created a workaround so that basically they caught the app close, took whatever was in local storage and put it somewhere else, and then the next time it loads back up, it just brings it back in. So it wasn't, it took me a week to get the thing approved and get it back out there, and at the time, I don't have a lot of people using it, but at the time, people would have been screwed. If that was their first experience, that would have really sucked. There's some minor hacking required to get the optimal experience to really feel like a native app. I'll show some tips there. It's really pretty minor compared to other things you might do. So. No, that's right. I'm also switching between the different themes on these just to give you an idea of what kind of stock. So I did try to do a fairly quick overview of what's available, and a lot of this is just pointing to the documentation that's available for anyone to go look at. So I recommend you do that. I'll try to go through it pretty quick because I don't think it's really that interesting for me to read documentation to you, but there are some examples. So I'm probably not going to be able to read this very well. What's the
plus?
Where's the plus in that? Oh, there it is. Oh, wait, that's in the spacing. Function. So anyway, basically there's a page structure that's built into it that allows you to, some of it's getting bigger, some of it's not. But anyways, how jQueryMobile works is essentially there's a data-role or a data-theme or a data-whatever. Data-role is the most heavily used. And you have a bunch of elements that, in this case, there's a div that's at the, not necessarily, well, it is at the root, it's right under your body. And you can have multiple div.pages, and that's really just like one screen you see. So when I transition from one to another back here, this one's one div on the same file, and this one's another one. And it sort of hides and does a transition and shows parts of it. There is more to it than that. You can have multiple document pages, so you can have a page in one document over here, one document over here, and you can also link to those, and it'll do the transitions as well. And it'll actually do a, rather than going and getting the whole page, it'll do a background request, pull in the DOM, and insert it into the same page you're on. So it's a pretty fast transition, even when you split it up into multiple documents. That means that the state history is a little different. So they do a lot with essentially hashing. You'll notice when I was on here. So I'm on a page called CoMORichWeb May. So the default link to that is to use a pound, a hash anchor, essentially, to get right to the page, which means I can refresh this and it still opens up to the right screen, even though it's one document. And so there's a bunch of stuff in here that you can manipulate that. What's this one? So you can manipulate the state directly. You can tell it to change a page in the back end, and so on. And all that's on there. So when I first looked at this page didn't exist. It's kind of funny. I was just writing this over the last few days, and it used to be that the documentation wasn't real good for dealing with changing pages dynamically. I have a tip in here later that one thing you could do to make that happen. So like if you're on a data-driven app and you're pulling some data from a server or you're pulling some data from local storage in my case, you want to be able to have essentially some template HTML, build it up, and then bind it somehow. That isn't really straightforward. really messes up the hash history, so be careful of that. And there's a defined way to do it. I actually ended up manipulating, there was another thing I'll show you in a minute where they have a particular query string attribute they use when they're toggling sort of nested lists in pages, different views and dialogues. I just kind of hacked into that because that was working at the time. I didn't have this document, but I recommend looking at this document if you're going to start doing that, which is probably, I mean, assuming it's something you'd want to do with math. Toolbars, there are a lot of interesting toolbar options. I'm not really showing them all here. So I've got a toolbar up here. You can get the back behavior essentially for free with some easy HTML. They do have more complicated nav bars, like something you'll see in a lot of apps. So you can do all kinds of arrangements, a header with a nav under it. You can even do footer nav bars that stick to the bottom of the page as you scroll and kind of hover over stuff like you used to see in a native app. And it's all just some attributes you can set. And again, the docs tell you everything you need to know. One of the things I took advantage of a lot is I really like how their lists function. So a lot of my app, I'm not really showing that much today, but a lot of my app uses the lists. And I built a little, I'm probably not able to see the code in this little screen. But I thought it might be useful to show JS fiddle thing here to show what the code looks like and what changes as you modify things. So I've got a screen here which collapsibles here that we already have seen throughout my show. This is the nested list I was talking about. So if you have one UL built in, embedded in an LI, it automatically does this thing that item A does. So this is just one list here that has one item with a header, and this one has a nested list in it. So it automatically puts an arrow here, and when I click on it, it does a transition to the nested list. So it's really quick and easy to get sort of a deep structure all built into one natural, like, nested set of ULs, LIs. So let's get this nested better. Oh, that is a little better. It's going to be hard to read the graphs in the sun there. Yeah. So this is what the collapsible looks like. All it is you have a div with the right data role, and you can put whatever you want to collapse inside of it. Like I said, really straightforward. If you've done any HTML, it doesn't look like anything complicated at all. So I've got a couple of that first screen you saw. Here's another page which you saw this transition for as a header. So a nested list here. We have a list divider is that blue one. You have the item A is the main item, and there's just a UL inside of it. And I added an icon to this back. Really is all that is right there. It's really straightforward. This next one I didn't even use very much, but I think it's pretty cool. Looks like I've got this amount. So there's a built-in search that looks a lot like what you see on phone lists and stuff. So I can build a really simple list that lets me do something cool like this. It narrows it down. I didn't have to write any JavaScript for this. It's just all some relatively simple HTML. So it's just got the data filter is true. It's got a placeholder text that you put in. It's got a different theme for the header. And there's a theme throughout the whole thing. I'll show that real quick. Slides too. So that's basically the list. I think those are really handy. There's a lot of common form elements too. This part I just totally hijacked some of the documentation and threw into a fiddle here. But so of course there's text inputs and text areas. Those aren't really nasty. You have a search input that gives you the clear, which I've zoomed this out so it looks funky. I really like this flip switch behavior. It even works like you can see on a phone, where it's got the nice transition, or you can even drag it and see the flip between. a slider, which again looks kind of funky, but it's also in. This is a checkbox list that you can do that has a list type UI. And I think there's a couple of types of drop downs. So there's some toggle buttons. This drop down is kind of interesting. It's got a dialog selection. I had another screen on here, which I don't know if you'll be able to see the difference. Back to the right size. So there's also a mini version of all of these. So if you're short on space, there's thinner sliders and stuff. Not really interesting. It's just one extra attribute you can throw on there that makes that pretty easy. Okay. Theming's pretty cool. So there are, I think, 5 themes built in. You can mix and match across your different elements of your page. So if you like the way a particular button looks, you just pick one of them and you say data theme is A or data theme is B. You can switch between these black, blue, gray, yellow defaults here. And this page shows you what all those look like for the different elements. You can get more advanced, which I did. I actually, for my app, I worked with someone else that already had basically a design that I wanted to follow to make it look different. And so there's an application here that they've put online where you can go into each of the themes, and with a web interface, you can change any color or anything you want here pretty quickly. So if I want the header for theme A to be red for some awful response to text, let's make this really ugly. There. Oh yeah. So you can do whatever you want, and then you just press the download button, and you get the CSS and resource files you need to just include in the project. There's also a gallery here where people have done, since it is just HTML and CSS, and I did some of this too, you can write your own CSS to make it look however you want, include different images. So people have used, just like Bootstrap, you kind of have a starting point, and you can throw extra stuff in there to make it look different. So I looked at this Fiat one there, and I thought it was pretty good. They have this, they built this little rotating car thing. It doesn't look good at all on here. Might be one to look at on or on your phone or something. That's the other thing I want to mention is that these slides are going to be live. I meant to even open up the live URL so you can open it on your phone if you want to play with it yourself and see what they actually look like on the phone. It's just, I think I included on that subreddit, I made a link, and it's just, I think it's CoMORichWeb.appspot.com if you want to check it out. You can go through these slides there, and sometimes skip over a lot of the documentation if you want to go back and look later, that'll be up. So. All right, so here's this is theme C or B. I don't remember. This is really going to be hard to read with the window there, but this is something you can reference later. So these are all the little hacks I found that make things look a lot more native. So first is a bunch of meta tags that specify your icons, like if someone bookmarks, if you just have it on the web and someone bookmarks it and puts it on their home screen, you can specify the icon that shows up. And you can do that for the different platforms, sometimes in different ways. There's also, you can set a splash screen, like a loading screen, just like you have on a native app. And let's see, what else? I think that's pretty much it. Oh, there's some things about specifying how Apple deals with the headers or not. They're normally there on the browser, like the Chrome around it. And you can get rid of that, or you can change the color and stuff. Another piece of advice, especially with jQueryMobile, is that you can just bind to click like you do with jQuery, but you're not going to get the responsiveness you really want. So there's something in all the mobile browsers pretty much that says that for a click action, it needs to wait, I think, 500 milliseconds or something like that to determine whether you're dragging or whether you're highlighting. And so if you just use click, you're going to have this behavior where a lot of the buttons in jQueryMobile will like highlight so you know that you're touching it, you let go. They're going to touch it, and then there's not going to be anything that happens for half a second, and that throws you off really bad. So There's another event, there's a custom event in there called vClick that binds to click for desktop browsers, binds to the appropriate sort of, it's not exactly tap, like they have some custom stuff going on there to determine the difference between a tap and hold and a tap and slide and stuff. But it works pretty well. The one thing you got to notice, and they say this all over the documentation, is you don't want to change the page while that's executing. If you do that, then it doesn't recognize your tap correctly, and you'll get it to fire a couple of times or it won't fire at all, and it's really weird. So you got to be careful about when you do a transition to another page because of a tap. You might have to let it wait a certain amount. Like you might want to catch the tap right away and show the press state on the button to make sure that they know that it's happening. But you might still want to wait 500 milliseconds to change the page. So that's kind of what I have down here is that there's a lot of times I had to get the experience I wanted, I had to run, like in my event code, I had to say set timeout 300 to do some work. Because if the work was really expensive, a lot of times that would lag it out too. Like even if you're binding to tab, you know, on most browsers, JavaScript's not really multi-threaded, so you can really disrupt that change in the color on the button if you don't, you know, do the best you can and do a timeout or some other kind of worker. This kind of a really handy couple of things here. So window.top that scroll to 1 pixel down. That's like a JavaScript thing you can do that basically gets rid of the top header bar in iOS. So it looks like an app. You just do that on load, and as soon as it's been scrolled 1 pixel, it goes away and you don't even see it. So you don't have the URL bar hanging over it. This was the thing I mentioned about state. You can do and UI page something to set a value. I think there's a better way to do it now if you look at that documentation. So that's probably deprecated there. This was kind of this isn't really a mobile thing, but it was really handy for me because I was, you know, doing something with a header image on both tablets and phones in different resolutions. And there's a nice vendor prefix for background size where you can adjust how an image scales. Like, do you want it to expand to the width? Do you want it to expand off the page? Do you want it to, you know, resize based on the spaces that are available? I had to have several catches in there for different common resolutions, but I made my same header image or 2 header images look really nice in all the different platforms. There are like 3 different ways you can deal with context menus. Obviously, there's a context menu handler for desktop that you want to catch. Then there's also a tap hold and I think a swipe I did too, depending on, you know, the way the context menus pop up is different on Android and iOS. So that's one case where you kind of need to know the phone if you want to give it the best experience. So let's see. Let's go down just a little more. Last couple of things here. So there was one more here somewhere. The CSS trick. Oh, there it is. So there's I'm really surprised this is a CSS rule. I don't know why. It doesn't really make sense there for me. But there's a WebKit prefix where you can say WebKit touch callout none. And what that does is on a phone, usually when you're on a website and you hold some element on the page, it brings up a menu that says, do you want to open a link in Safari? Do you want to send it to an email or whatever? And that was really annoying because people would be clicking and holding a little too long on a button, and then they'd get that menu. Well, there's a CSS prefix that says don't ever do that for whatever element you want to set it to. The other thing I mentioned here is that Chrome Canary has some really nice tools to help you test in a desktop browser and make it a lot more like the mobile experience. I wrote this a few days ago, and since they've updated it, and I believe it's in the main branch now, so we need to go get Canary. I'm not really sure.
Just inspect the element here.
Okay.
And then bottom right gear.
So there's a gear down here that does some cool stuff that you may not have seen in the developer tools before, unless you watched Brian's talk a couple months ago. But the new ones that are here, you can't even see them on here, which is awesome. But I can't even see it well enough to do it. I'll look here. So there is one that says override user agent. So you can tell it that it's an iPhone or whatever you're targeting with the user agent. And then, I guess this must not be updated. It's all tracking error. Once you've done that, there's an additional one really handy tool because there are a couple of things that are just a little bit different on the desktop that if you want to troubleshoot without having to go all the way to your phone, these tools that they added really help. So again, override user agent. Let's try to move this where you can see. Let's see. It's still kind of small. But this override user agent has been here for a while. But the thing they added was this override device metrics. So as soon as I select the iPhone, it says that I can have a resolution just like the iPhone. I can switch it to horizontal or landscape or a portrait. And then I can also emulate touch events. So now it's going to run, I mentioned that V-click thing, it's going to run the tap version instead of the click version. But this is exactly this, essentially the resolution you'll see on an iPhone. So this is a lot more like the experience. If you got some weird glitch between the two, that's a good way to test it without having to go all the way to your phone. And if you update your Chrome browser, it should be in your stable branch now. The one I saw today. So what else here? Okay, so that was all jQueryMobile. The other part of this is PhoneGap. And like I said before, I use PhoneGap Build in particular, which is a service so PhoneGap's been around a while, and it's basically a platform you can download. It's got an IDE and a compiler that takes your HTML, JavaScript, and wraps it in everything it needs to be to work on the different mobile platforms. It's great, but it's a little bit of a setup headache that I didn't really need. So the nice thing is about 6 months ago, they put out a service called PhoneGap Build, where it's just build.phonegap.com, where instead of downloading their builder, you upload them a zip of all your source files and a config file, and then it takes like 2 minutes, and you've got downloadable builds for all the different platforms. That's really slick. And so that's why I said I wasn't going to talk much about PhoneGap, because I didn't have to do much. It's really not that impressive. There are a couple of limitations still. If you're deploying to Android or iOS, both of those require your code to be signed before you can get them in the app stores. So if anybody is interested in that, I can go into that. I can give you some references or something. But basically, you have to build a certificate in 2 completely different ways for each platform, jump through some hoops, and eventually you upload that certificate to PhoneGap, and they do the signing for you as well. It takes a little bit. And then the other thing is that for iOS, in the last year or so, they removed, for whatever reason, they decided to remove the web tools to let you upload binaries directly to your app profile. So if it weren't for that, you could totally build an iOS app without having a Mac. That's the one thing you need a Mac for. They have this program called App Launcher that you need to post your binaries to the App Store. Here's their documentation on the config. It's just an XML document with some specified stuff. The hardest part of this, honestly, is that there are about, if you want to deploy to all platforms, there are like 30 different sizes of icons you have to build, because everyone wants something different. So that can take forever to resize it all properly and get it all packaged up. But other than that, it's all pretty straightforward. The other part of this is the PhoneGap API. So I didn't need any of this, but I could see future apps that I build that I would. So in addition to taking common web framework stuff, packaging it up in essentially a canvas that's just running in a browser inside of an app for you with PhoneGap, they also developed an API that's all JavaScript that lets you access specific phone features that you normally can't hit on the web. So that's all on their docs here. But basically, it looks like you're just calling JavaScript, and it won't work at all on the desktop. It won't do anything. But when you send it up to PhoneGap, they'll turn that into machine code on the device to do stuff like accelerometer, camera, get to media on the device, a bunch of other stuff that different phones and so on have. There's also a plugin architecture. So some people build plugins that do even more. Like one of them I ran into is I wanted to send an email out, and I ended up just using a webmail link because it was simpler. But they do have a way to get to the internal mailing system on the phone through PhoneGap JavaScript stuff that someone wrote a plugin for. So if you ever get in a bind my talk. Are there any questions? I didn't really see any hands raised or anything.
So what's the process to submitting to the App Store is still the same as the whole
Yeah.
have they talked about the possibility of like just having these bundles? Because I'm assuming it's just like HTML, CSS,
Yeah.
and stuff, where they could just like live grab it from like your own repository or something. Is that a possibility?
They do. They actually do with PhoneGap Build. You can upload a zip, or you can point at a GitHub, and it'll monitor.
So if you update the GitHub repo after you submitted your app, will it update?
It'll build, but it won't send it to the App Store. I mean, you'll have to go and get the.
Right. You would. What I mean is like you would submit the one from a month ago, and if you went in and changed that HTML, CSS, would they push that out to all the phones that have your build, or do you have to
You would have to go submit the binaries again. Like, there's a website that's a home for your app, which I should have took a picture of or something. But basically, they lay it out for all the different phones, and it'll have a little progress bar when you just upload it, and eventually it'll say, oh, here's a link to your binary. And then you can download it and put it in the App Store, or there's also if you can test locally, it really depends on how you set it up, but they put a, what's the name of that thing, the little scannable code for your phone, I don't even remember what it's called.
QR code.
Yeah, QR code. They put a QR code for your apps too. And you can add other logins so other people can test with you or whatever, straight through PhoneGap, and there's other stuff on there too.
So besides the local storage problem that was on
Yeah.
iOS, was there any other incompatibilities between different mobile platforms, Android and iOS?
There's only one I can think of right off, and that's, I just mentioned that I used a mail-to link to send an email. Worked perfect in iOS, and Android it mostly worked, but not the way I hoped. I was formatting a big like table in HTML because that was like data that I want people to put in a spreadsheet or whatever, and for whatever reason the Android phone doesn't default to HTML emails, and there's no way you can tell it to, so they just get a big text dump of your HTML on that email, which I wasn't real happy with, but I wasn't concerned enough to to go the other route either. All right, how am I doing on time?
Probably about time.
All right, well, last thing I want to mention is kind of off topic, but like I said, I work for Fullertech. We're actually in the process of looking for people right now, so if you or anybody you know is looking for a job or a better job, you can come talk to me. I think what I highlighted here is I have a video that's based on a lecturer that wrote this book that's really intriguing about what motivates people. So if I had to make a pitch for my company, when I said what's different about our company is we care about what he talks about. Basically, the science shows that people aren't always driven by money, and sometimes like bonuses can harm creativity because you focus on the wrong things. What most people really want is the ability to achieve mastery, to be self-directed, and to I forget the other one. And to have a purpose. So a lot of the reasons, I know some people in here go off and do startup stuff. A lot of the reason that happens is because you want to have control over it. You want to do something you really care about, and you want to do something interesting that you can, make yourself better while you're doing it. And a lot of jobs don't offer that. And I can honestly say that we do where we're at. So if you're interested in talking about what we do and want to hear about that, and maybe have kind of a startup culture without the startup risk, you can come talk to me.
Thanks, Luke. I guess we'll get about 10 or 15 minutes, let Brian get set up over here, and then we'll check it out.